A small town girl went to ask for Halloween candy and disappeared without a trace. The case immediately caught the attention of people across the country, and in the days that followed, more than 5,000 people joined the search for her. But despite this scale of investigation, the police officers were unable to solve the mystery. This continued until they encountered an extremely unexpected twist that shed light on what had happened. The shocking truth has finally come to light. Friends, before we start the investigation, please subscribe to our channel. It will really help us grow. Eliza Ann French was born on June 2nd, 1964 in the American state of Wisconsin. When she was little, her parents divorced and the girl and her mom moved to a small town called Fond du Lac. Later, her mom remarried and Lisa had a younger brother. In 1973, when Lisa was 9 years old, she attended a local elementary school, was a member of the Scouts organization, and liked to spend most of her time walking outside with other children. This October, the girl was eagerly preparing to celebrate Halloween, and more specifically, she wanted to collect as much candy as possible from her neighbors. Initially, she planned to dress up in a butterfly costume, but the weather at the end of October was quite cold, so her mom had to improvise. She picked out a new costume for her daughter from clothes she found at home, including a big black hat, and let her go outside. Lisa planned to go to the neighbors' houses with her friend, but that night her friend was punished by her parents and stayed home. As a result, the girl went to ask for candy alone. Her mom told her not to go too far from home. The neighborhood in which they lived was considered quite safe, and Lisa's parents knew all their neighbors for hundreds of meters around. Besides, there were other children with their parents walking the streets at the time, so Lisa's mom wasn't too worried about her daughter's safety. The girl was also planning to attend a Halloween party organized by parents of other children from their neighborhood. This year, the news was spreading the information that some people started to find blades and poison in candy in the run-up to the holiday, which scared parents all over the country. For this reason, residents in their neighborhood decided to organize a place for all children to spend Halloween in a calm and controlled environment. Lisa left home around 6 p.m. and was supposed to be back by 7 p.m. However, the girl never showed up. At first, her mother thought that Lisa was playing, trying to get as much candy as possible, but closer to 8 p.m., the woman decided to go looking for her. She walked the neighboring streets, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. She also started asking everyone passing by if they had seen Lisa. Information about the girl's disappearance instantly spread throughout the neighborhood. Every minute, more and more neighbors joined the search, but they could not find any trace of the girl. Soon the police joined the search. By that time, several dozen people were looking for Lisa, and the number continued to grow. Investigators interviewed neighbors and learned that the girl apparently managed to enter only 2 houses, her classmates and her teachers. After that, her trail went cold. This only added to everyone's concern, as both houses were only a short walk from her home. The search continued throughout the night, but it yielded no results. Toward morning, more locals came out to look for Lisa, and the police expanded the search to the entire city. Later, federal TV stations talked about the case, and it caught the attention of people all over the country. For many of them, Halloween was a fun tradition, and their children, like Lisa, would go around to neighbors' houses collecting candy. Because of this, the girl's disappearance felt like a universal tragedy, and thousands of people wanted to help find her. The second day of the search was also fruitless, but the police didn't plan to give up. They printed thousands of flyers with Lisa's picture, and volunteers posted them all over the city and far beyond. Local gas stations offered free gasoline to all participants in the search operation, which eventually numbered more than 5,000. They combed every street, forests, fields, rivers, and any other places where Lisa could be. People on horses and ATVs also joined the search, covering the most inaccessible corners around the city, but all of them failed to find the girl. This went on for several days until the police received a call. On November 3rd, 3 days after Lisa's disappearance, a farmer was driving along a small road called Taichi, just 5 kilometers from the girl's home. At one point, he noticed 2 garbage bags near the side of the road. The man, like all the locals, knew about Lisa's disappearance, so he decided to examine the contents of the bags just in case. To his horror, in one of them he saw the girl's body, and in the other, her clothes. The farmer immediately drove to the nearest telephone and reported his find to the police. The news spread so quickly that by the time the police arrived, several dozen locals had already gathered near the roadside. All of them were in deep shock at the realization that in front of them most likely the body of Lisa, and she was killed by someone. Investigators took one look to confirm this version. They determined that the deceased was indeed Lisa and handed the body over to medical experts for examination. The experts established the fact of abuse, and the cause of death was initially considered to be strangulation. However, they later realized that the victim had actually died of shock. Given that there was no DNA testing in 1973, detectives hoped to get some evidence from the victim's belongings or body. Forensic investigators examined all of the clothing and collected bits of fabric from what appeared to be extraneous items and found hair on them. No fingerprints were found, however, including on the garbage bags in which the perpetrator had put the girl's body and belongings. The news of the brutal murder shook not only their small town, but also spread across the country. People demanded that the local police department catch and punish the perpetrator as soon as possible because they were worried about the safety of their own children. Lisa's funeral took place a few days after the discovery of her body. So many people came to the ceremony, and organizers even had to build several queues at once so that everyone could say goodbye to the girl. Meanwhile, the police department continued to investigate. Given that they had no hard evidence, they began to work out Lisa's possible route that night. From the testimony of 2 families, they learned that the girl had stopped at their house to get candy, and that was the end of her trail. It was almost immediately after she left the second house. Further events could develop according to 2 scenarios. Either an unknown criminal saw Lisa on the street and took her away with him, or she went to another house to get candy and the man there attacked her. The first version was unlikely, as the girl would hardly go with a stranger or get into his car, and the neighbors didn't hear any screams. On this basis, the second version seemed much more likely to the investigators. Of course, they questioned all the inhabitants of the street, on which there were several dozen houses, but all of them said that the girl had not visited them. Then the police began to study each family and try to identify possible suspects. Investigators also realized that the girl only went to families she knew well. Although Lisa knew almost all of her neighbors, she knew many of them rather poorly. The police officers asked her mom who else from that street Lisa might have visited. The woman gave them several names. Searchers were immediately interested in one particular family, 24-year-old Gerald Turner, his girlfriend and their young daughter. There were several reasons why Turner attracted the interest of the police. For one thing, Lisa knew him very well. Previously, the man and his family had lived in the duplex behind the wall where Lisa lived. Their families were in constant contact, and the girl often ran to the Turner's house to play with his daughter. In addition, the girl quite often communicated with the man himself. For example, she liked to show him some new things that her parents bought her, and Turner was always happy to listen to her. The second reason why the police thought he was involved was that even they interviewed everyone in the neighborhood, his behavior seemed strange. The man didn't show any obvious signs that something was wrong with him, but the police still found his answers suspicious. The third reason came to light a little later. Detectives realized that the girl had been attacked just minutes after leaving the house, and they had a fairly accurate understanding of the timing of the incident. It turned out that the Turner was home alone during that interval, as his girlfriend and child had gone to a Halloween party. So, in theory, he could have had the opportunity to commit this crime before they returned. Based on all this information, Turner seemed the most likely suspect, but proving his involvement was extremely difficult. The police came to talk to him several times, and the man insisted on his innocence. Then they offered him a polygraph examination, and Turner agreed. During the interrogation, the operator viewed some of the answers to key questions as ambiguous, and detectives attempted to use this information to get him to confess. However, the man stood his ground. They later decided to conduct another such interview, but this time Turner simply refused. Then the police decided to use what little evidence they had to try and link the man to the murder. As we recall, forensic found some fibers from some other fabric on the victim's body and clothing, as well as a human hair. After examining it, they concluded that the hair was most likely not from the head, but from the killer's body. Police obtained a search warrant to search Turner's home and also to obtain samples of his hair. In the man's bedroom, they noticed the blanket that made up the bed because the fabric particles from the victim's clothing were the same color. Upon close examination, the experts confirmed that they could indeed have been left behind by contact with this blanket. However, it was simply not possible to prove this 100%. As for the hair, it was also ambiguous. They matched in color but without DNA analysis. Experts could not establish an unequivocal match. Nevertheless, the findings only increased suspicion against Turner, and the police continued to think about how they could prove his guilt. They kept coming to talk to him, taking him to interrogations, but the man kept insisting that he was innocent. All this dragged on for many months. For Lisa's family, what was happening was a real torment. In addition to the terrible loss they faced, her relatives lived in ignorance for months, wondering who had taken her life. Moreover, at the time of the murder, Lisa's mother was in the early stages of pregnancy and had to prepare for the arrival of her child in the midst of this tragedy. As Turner continued to deny his guilt, detectives decided to speak with his girlfriend and ask her to give a more detailed account of that evening. According to the woman, she went to a Halloween party with her daughter and returned at approximately 7:15. When she entered the house, she saw Gerald lying on the couch in his bathrobe. He immediately told her that he felt very ill and wanted to rest. While the woman was in the living room, he got up from the couch several times and went into the bedroom to lie down, but returned very quickly. At the same time, he asked not to be disturbed, insisting that he needed to rest. The woman thought this was a bit strange, but soon went to visit her mother with her daughter. This story increased the police officers' suspicion of Turner, but they were still unable to prove his guilt. This continued until August 7th of the following year, when he was once again called in for questioning. During this conversation, 9 months after the murder, the man suddenly decided to confess to what he had done. He said that Lisa had stopped by to get candy and he had called her to his house. At that time, his girlfriend and daughter were still at the party. From the first second, the man decided to abuse the victim, so he took her to the bedroom and committed the crime. After committing the crime, he noticed that Lisa was not showing signs of life. Turner was frightened because, according to his own words, he didn't plan to kill her. The man tried to give her first aid, but at the same moment he heard his girlfriend and daughter pull up to the house. He quickly moved Lisa's body from the bed to the bathroom, which was adjacent to the bedroom, and then went into the living room and lay down on the couch. As soon as his girlfriend entered the house, he said he felt ill and asked not to be disturbed. Turner retired to the bedroom, hoping the woman wouldn't follow him. However, he couldn't sit there quietly, for fear that she would walk in there at any moment. So the man returned to the living room every few minutes. He realized that if his girlfriend decided to use the bathroom, she would immediately see Lisa's body, and he tried not to let that happen. Soon the woman went to her mother's house, and Turner began to think about how to get rid of the body. He put socks on his hands to avoid leaving fingerprints, then took 2 garbage bags and put the body and the victim's belongings in them. Then he took it all into his car and drove to a neighboring town, where he dumped the bags by the side of the road and returned home. Thus he managed to pull it all off before Lisa's relatives, along with other people, went looking for the girl. Turner's confession shocked not only the victim's relatives and residents, but also the investigators themselves. They could not charge him for 9 months because the circumstantial evidence was simply insufficient. However, for some reason, the man suddenly decided to confess to everything and provided the police with so many details that an innocent person simply could not have known. Turner was eventually arrested and the prosecution began preparing for trial. It began just a few months after his arrest. However, the prosecutor faced a rather unpleasant problem. Despite the fact that the suspect confessed to the crime in full detail, he withdrew the confession right before the start of the trial. The man insisted that the police officers had written the confession themselves, and he had only signed it because he was tired of the constant harassment from the investigators. There was little doubt about his involvement. His ex-girlfriend, who had no idea what was going on, also considered him guilty and took the stand. In addition, the prosecution pointed to fibers found on the victim's clothing. They matched the same blanket in Turner's bedroom where he had taken his victim. But the prosecutor's main argument was the suspect's confession, which contained too many details to be a fabrication. Turner was found guilty and sentenced to 38 years in prison. However, his story did not end there. Despite the severity of his crime, Turner was released early for good behavior. He was released in 1992, 17 years after his incarceration. However, the man was not released back into society, but was placed in a special facility. In fact, it was an ordinary residential home where former prisoners could live under supervision. Such places are as close as possible to life in freedom, but with their own peculiarities and limitations. Despite this, Turner's release caused a wave of indignation among both Lisa's relatives and the residents of Milwaukee, where the man was placed. People were outraged at the fact that a dangerous criminal had been placed next to them and demanded that the authorities remove him. However, city and state authorities didn't have the authority to forcibly evict Turner, so they began to ask the correctional system to reverse the decision. As a result, a year after the man was released, the correctional system decided to return him back to prison. Their investigation revealed that the parole board had made a mistake and Turner was not originally eligible to be released so early. Around the same time, the authorities began working on a law that would tighten the conditions for the release of such dangerous criminals. The idea was that people convicted of abuse who posed a risk of reoffending would not be released back into society, but would be transferred to closed medical institutions and kept there until doctors concluded that they were no longer a danger to others. Lisa's mother hoped that this law would help prevent all future attempts by the man to go free, but another unpleasant surprise awaited them. In 1998, the man again applied for parole, and for some unknown reason, the board refused to consider him a dangerous sex offender. However, his ex-wife and several ex-girlfriends appeared at the hearing and told of instances in which he had been violent if they refused him intimacy. But even this didn't convince the commissioners. In the end, Turner did not fall under the new law. He was released back into the wild, and the man was again placed in a special house under supervision. In the same year, he almost attacked with a knife a law enforcement officer who came to check on him, but even so, he was left free. Later, Turner sued the company that denied him employment because of his criminal history. He was living in Wisconsin at the time, and by law, employers were not allowed to refuse to hire people based on their backgrounds. The court sided with Turner, and he received an undisclosed amount of money from that company as compensation. This continued until 2003. The man continued to live in a special home, and during one of his visits, law enforcement found a huge amount of prevented photos and videos on his computer, as well as 3 movies about serial killers. Under the terms of his parole, he was not authorized to view or keep any of it. Therefore, the man was arrested. He was given a trial which resulted in the judge deciding to send him back to prison, giving him a sentence of 15 years. Lisa's relatives thought that this was the end of Turner's story, and he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But another unpleasant twist awaited them. In 2018, the commission refused to extend his sentence, and the man had to go free. Lisa's mom was not going to accept this arrangement and created a petition demanding that Turner be kept behind bars. It collected thousands of signatures and attracted the attention of people all over the country who did not want a dangerous criminal back in society. The authorities also sided with them, and they have since worked together to try to get the decision to release him changed. This time they again appealed to the law and demanded that the man be transferred to a closed psychiatric hospital. He himself, of course, tried to challenge this decision with the help of lawyers, and this process lasted for several years. This continued until 2022, when the judge made his ruling. He ruled that Turner was covered by the law because he was a danger to others, which meant he should be transferred to a locked hospital instead of being released. Even so, his lawyers appealed and are still trying to challenge the judge's decisions to this day. At the moment, the final decision has not yet been made, as the sessions have been repeatedly postponed. Turner himself continues to be confined in a locked facility and is currently 75 years old. Despite this, opponents of his release believe that he's a threat even at the age and should not be released under any circumstances. It's also worth noting that although Turner has refused to plead guilty directly, he has repeatedly made indirect but quite convincing admissions. During the original trial, when the man was due to be sentenced, he walked past Lisa's mother and said, "I didn't mean to do it." In addition, at some point during his imprisonment, he wrote a letter addressed to Lisa himself, in which he also confessed to what he had done. In the letter, the man apologized to her and confirmed that he had killed her. There was another moment when he indirectly confessed to what he had done. Turner once said that if he had not committed the crime on Halloween, there would not have been so much public and media attention and nobody would have cared. Thus, Lisa's mom has yet to fight to ensure that the man is never released, and his current attempt to secure his release may not be his last. Friends, share your opinion about this story in the comments below, and don't forget to put a like under this video if you liked it. Thanks for watching.